Trench warfare. Two lines of soldiers diametrically opposed, masses of bodies huddled together in wretched conditions, fighting for every foot gained, paying with gallons of blood. Though the development of gas weapons and the introduction of tanks darkened the end of World War I, the earlier days of the war were lighthearted. After less than a year of fighting, casualties on both sides were already reaching the hundreds of thousands. As winter began, conditions in the trenches worsened. Christmas Eve of 1914, British and German troops huddled in trenches not 50 yards from each other. From a first-hand account by a British rifleman, a German soldier shouted from across no man's land, "Tomorrow, you no shoot, we no shoot." At least they're to the point. Christmas morning of 1914 saw many unofficial ceasefires across the Western Front. Opposing troops put down their weapons, entered no man's land, shared drinks, cigarettes, even kicked a ball around. But what was it? What made two enemy groups who had been slaughtering each other for months spend a morning together? I think it's music. I think music could do this. Accounts taken from soldiers on both sides reference singing, Christmas hymns being sung by one side and taken up by the other. Songs known by both sides shared in a unique moment of unity. And it seems like music stretches back further and further the more you look. Contemporary music to medieval chants sung in worship services, tablets that are 16,000 years old contain notation for a song known as Hurrian Hymn Number 6. Historians are so creative. The song was an ode to the goddess Nikal, asking for her blessing to promote fertility. 16,000 years ago, there was an equivalent of playing a guitar in front of a campfire. 4.4 million years ago, an Australopithecus walked upright for the first time. Since then, there's been a rhythm behind everything that has been done in humanity's past. And it doesn't even stop there. 520 million years ago is the best estimate for the development of a heart and blood vessels, a constant beat at the center of our being, never stopping for 520 million years. What does that do to a person, to a race? Andante, at a walking pace, moderately slow, 56 to 108 beats per minute. This is a commonly used musical notation to mark tempo, and curiously, it is the only tempo marking with an actual comparison to a real-life event. All the other markings include relative phrases such as faster or slower, or just include vague terms like very slow or very quickly. So ultimately this means a walking pace is what the entire musical tempo scale is based on? Well, what about the numerical standardizations? In BPM, surely that isn't related to a walking pace. There wasn't really a standard unit of time until clocks were invented, right? Well, in my research I discovered that seconds weren't included on clocks until the 18th century. Before the Industrial Revolution, clocks were expensive, and even then only could keep time within about 15 minutes. And this is only slightly better than a sundial. Eventually, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the NIST, purchased a Rifler clock, a clock whose pendulum sits within a vacuum chamber in order to reduce loss due to friction, and standardized the second using this clock. Though this created a game of telephone where clocks were standardized, and then those standardized more clocks, and so on and so on. Eventually, the development of quartz crystal clocks, which took advantage of what's called the piezoelectronic property, truly standardized clocks globally. In 1960, in search of a truly standardized second, the NIST set the second to be a duration of 9,192,631,770 cycles of microwave radiation. This corresponds to what's known as the hyperfine energy transition in cesium atom. Before all that, developing time comes from our comes from the Babylonians. Now, imagine you're a Babylonian worker. You don't really know what a second or a minute is, but you know it's 60 seconds. And so someone much smarter than you says, well, it's a 60th of a 60th of a 12th of your day. 30 paces in a minute? Well, a pace is 2 steps, so that's 60 beats per minute. 60 beats per minute is a walking pace. I vividly remember this time when I was really young. The school sent us home with this pamphlet instructing our parents to make sure their children, me, memorized information in case they got lost or kidnapped or whatever. Our full legal name, our full street address, the name of both companies my parents worked for, both of their cell phones, and our home phone. Because yes, we still had a landline. And I vividly remember holding this landline with one hand on each side using my thumbs, because that's just how big the landline was relative to me. And my parents would type it in, and I would type it in, but sometimes when I typed it in, it didn't quite sound right. But you're typing in numbers. Why doesn't it sound right? Well, because every time you pressed one of the buttons, it made a noise. If you pressed the wrong button, it made the wrong noise. What baffled my little brain was that no matter which phone I typed it on, our landline, our other landline, not that we had 2 landlines, 2 different wireless receivers for the same landline, was that no matter which phone I typed it in on, our landline or my dad's BlackBerry, yes, BlackBerries were a thing, it sounded the same. And so those are standardized. Eventually this becomes pointless. In high school I got an iPhone. All those numbers got saved to contacts and they all transferred to my newest phone. Some studies of the time said that putting a melody behind text made it more difficult to remember, though this was found to be kind of not true. The learning a text and a melody at the same time was more difficult than learning just text or just a melody at the same time. Who'd have thought? But putting text to a melody you already know was significantly easier. And even easier was the way the phones did it. Each digit was related to a pitch, and each pitch was standardized, along with the chunking of phone numbers, 3-digit area code, 3-digit whatever, 4 digits. This made it really easy to remember. Well, how does music and pitches affect the brain? Well, looking at it from a purely physical response point, what activates and what doesn't. When listening to music, almost every major section of the brain is active. The brainstem and the basal ganglia, which are in charge of unconscious function like breathing and digestion, increase in activity. The amygdala, responsible for emotion, lights up like a Christmas tree. The neocortex, the area responsible for pattern recognition, the thing that let us dominate the planet, sees increased blood flow as neurons fire at a higher rate. The prefrontal cortex, the reason for the discovery of quantum mechanics, the creation of nations, the clump of cells that put a rover on Mars, shuts down. Now, listening to music reduces the prefrontal cortex activity. Well, it's a little bit misleading for the shock value. It changes. It works more like your base functions. It works in tandem with your other areas. And I think this speaks to a larger aspect of enjoying music. The prefrontal cortex is largely responsible for our personalities. Music reduces the importance of the moment-to-moment interpretation. It brings us back into a more primal form, almost. Enjoying music, making music, interpreting music, this collection of actions has been coined musicking by Christopher Small, and minimizes and and minimizes the importance of the individual, the personality. That's when social barriers begin to break down. There's a whole wealth of history regarding music that I don't have the ability to cover. The cultural importance of spirituals to enslaved people is hugely important and would deserve its entirely own discussion. The cultural identity of native peoples that's held in their songs could fill hours. I don't have hours, and both of these would require a lot of research that I haven't done and experience that I don't have. I'm just gonna get it on a little soapbox here and give my 2 cents about one aspect of this mental health discussion before I get too deeply into it. And that's that terms like mental illness and mental disorder are incredibly harmful and simplify these very complex issues, very complex struggles to a word, and a word with a negative connotation that I feel is not appropriate for the use in this context, in that context. When I speak about experiences, especially when I'm talking about mental health, a lot of this is my own personal experience, or at least experience from people that I trust closely, or at least firsthand accounts of people I trust. And I really don't have a great segue into the next section, so let's open with a broad, sweeping statement that's pretty subjective. So, loneliness is one of the biggest reasons for mental health issues. Humans are inherently social creatures. Just look at that guy from Castaway. And lack of social interactions, a lack of connection to others is one of the biggest driving forces behind things like depression, anxiety, bipolar. But what's music besides other people thinking the same way you do? But what's music besides thinking the same way other people do? How many million people cried to the same sad Taylor Swift song? Or how many people were afraid when Darth Vader came in with the Imperial March? Or how many people feel pride hearing their national anthem played? I feel like this goes further yet even. On YouTube, there is millions of playlists that try to capture a very specific feeling. And one that I interact with frequently is a very specific reason and a very, very specific type of crying. Especially at night. Crying alone at night. On YouTube, there's millions of playlists trying to find a very specific reason, a very specific kind of crying. Crying at night by yourself because you broke up with someone, because life's hard, because whatever. If you felt it, there's a playlist out there for it. Many of these I have listened to alone in the dark, crying. And under those videos, there's thousands, if not millions, of comments with words of encouragement. I was here too. I feel what you felt. You're not alone. Being there, overwhelmed with emotion, in the dark, crying. In a sea of churning emotions and despair. Just for a moment, you see someone else, and they were there too, feeling what you felt, and they made it out. Or at least started feeling better. And in those moments, there isn't much more you can hope for. Feeling the empathy, knowing that someone else felt the same way as you. Having a companion and being given permission to feel the way you do, knowing that so many other people have felt that way too, and that you are not alone. Well, the music conveys that sadness. It's conveys the sadness and the empathy and the feeling in a way that words just couldn't. Looking back at what I've said about the brain and what music does, it's not hard to see the combination of effects: increasing emotion, increasing pattern recognition, decreasing sense of self. Suddenly, it's easy to be one of millions of people. And one of millions of people crying. One of millions of people there for someone else crying. If something as difficult as sadness can be portrayed and perceived like this, why not something else? Why not anger? Why not joy? Why not hope? Is it really so hard to hear a familiar song from across the no man's land and just want peace for one day between you and those other men in trenches? Just want peace for one day. Just want peace for Christmas.